Good evening, everyone. I'm Susanna Clark, Director of the Mahindra Humanities Center and the Morton B. Knopfel Professor of Music. On behalf of all of my colleagues at the Mahindra Center, I'm delighted to see so many of you join us online today. Migration has been at the heart of the Mahindra Center for the last few years as part of our program, Migration and the Humanities, which is generously supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Today, our topic is Border in Humanities, Reporting and Documenting, and the conversation will focus on migration and the southern US border. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our moderator for this evening, Anne-Marie Lipinski, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and is the curator of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism here at Harvard University. Before coming to Harvard in 2011, she served as senior lecturer and vice president for civic engagement at the University of Chicago. Prior to that, she worked at the Chicago Tribune as a reporter, investigations editor, metropolitan editor, managing editor, and ultimately, she was the editor-in-chief and senior vice president of the Tribune for nearly 8 years. It was as a reporter at the Tribune that Anne-Marie won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. And as an editor, she oversaw work that won Pulitzers in numerous categories. She is a trustee of the Poynter Institute for Journalism, and in 2014 was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And now it is my great pleasure to hand things over to Anne-Marie Lipinski. Over to you, Anne.
Susie, thank you so much. What a pleasure to be asked to participate in this important gathering tonight, and thank all of you who are tuned in to listen. We, as you know, Mahindra has done a series of conversations about border and humanities, and tonight this is going to be one focused on the storytellers, the people who tell us what we know about life at the border, humanity and inhumanity, as Mahindra points out. And so we are very fortunate to be joined by two of our very finest storytellers in this realm, photographer Ariana Dressler and writer Alfredo Corchado. So just before we start with them, I wanted to say a little bit about our format. Each of them, Alfredo and Ariana, will be presenting, after which I will start the conversation with a few questions. And then we invite you to pose your questions, but don't wait until then. Please, as you think of them, add them to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, so we have them when it's time to open up for that conversation. So first of all, I want to introduce Ariana, who is a photojournalist based in San Diego, and her work focuses on social and political issues. She's covered a wide range of stories, from the Arab Spring to the front lines of Syria's civil war. Last year, she completed a series on migrants and their experiences at the US-Mexico border. Recently, she has documented 3 of our country's most pressing stories: the COVID-19 pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and the presidential campaign and election. Ariana is a graduate of the Design Institute of San Diego and has been published in the New York Times, The Guardian, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, Le Monde, BuzzFeed News, and many other places. Her photographs documenting migrants and immigration offer us both an intimacy and humanity, and that is a factor of her skill, of course, but also, I think, of her personal experience, something she will talk some about tonight. Please welcome Ariana.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Thanks so much for the introduction. Hi, guys. My name is Ariana, based in San Diego. And I have been, like Anne-Marie said, I've worked in the Middle East, US, and Mexico. And I'm actually, before I introduce my slideshow, I want to tell you why I'm so interested in the border. I'm first generation German Mexican, or first generation American, I'm so sorry. My father is German, my mother is Mexican. The reason I'm so interested in working in Mexico is because twofold. I feel like I was rediscovering my roots, where I come from. Also because I'm so passionate about human interest stories. It just, without saying it, it's not too eloquent, it just sort of happened. When the migrant caravan came in November, actually to Tijuana, November 2018, I went to Tijuana. I'm going to share my screen now. Share, sorry about that. I went to Tijuana to see what was going on. I heard a lot of rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, calling what Trump said an invasion. He said some people are calling it an invasion. And obviously that's not what happened. So right now we're looking at a photo of Playas de Tijuana. It is, the border fence goes into the Pacific Ocean, dividing Tijuana and Imperial Beach. This is at nighttime. This was taken early December of 2018. Lots of people would actually congregate here before crossing, before jumping the border fence, and not always jumping from this location, as you can see. Border Patrol would always be on the other side, especially during that time, and it was lit with many lights. So it's really hard to go that way. Here we're looking at Benito Juarez. So this was a sports complex, or it is a sports complex in Tijuana. The number, to my knowledge, was at least 5,800 migrants from Central America that were staying here. Now, if you can see, I mean, this is only a portion of what it looked like. There were people basically sleeping on top of each other. It was incredibly unsanitary. People were sick. The living conditions were awful. People were sleeping outside of this sports complex because there was not much room. And immediately when I went to the shelter, you could tell how dire the situation was. People were coughing all around you. Children, you know, not wearing always the proper clothes, meaning jackets, or even just adults as well. Here, people were bathing outside. Now, behind that wall, there was actually cars passing by. Now, where I was taking the photo, there's tents behind me, people passing by. To the left of that, where people were showering, there were porta potties. On the floor, on the ground, there was dirty water mixed with clean water. People were washing their clothes and showering right there. Here, this was December 2nd, 2018. This was actually my first jump that I photographed. There were many photojournalists around. It's kind of hard to tell, obviously. Border Patrol was on the other side. And I think there's a misconception when people say, you know, I have no problems with people coming the right way. Well, Border Patrol was on the other side, and it's not like they were trying to hide it. And I think we also forget that you know, it's not illegal to claim asylum. You know, and unfortunately, people are being turned away. And so that's just not the way. So anyway, this is a woman. In the next photo, you'll see 2 women with 3 kids. Obviously, the kids were traumatized. And it was a pretty emotional time to document. Actually, after I took this photo, I remember I saw a woman crying. So mind you, I'm on the Mexican side, they're on the US side. I saw a woman crying and I asked if she knew them, and she just said it was very sad. And she said that her boyfriend was actually documenting the scene. So also we have to keep in mind when we're documenting migrants, it's some, you know, a lot of people are not running away, I apologize, but are leaving violent situations, whether it be gang violence, even abuse, to the point, or maybe they just can't even afford to, they're not making enough money to survive. I mean, the list goes on, but I think it's important to ask, hey, can I photograph you? Because sometimes we could be actually causing more harm. And that's very, very important. So this man is named Tomas. I actually asked him, I was the only photographer at the time, and I asked if I could take his photo and asked what he was doing. He said he was digging a hole under the fence because a woman earlier tried to jump the fence with her two sons. Her two sons made it. Border Patrol took them away, but she wasn't able to make it. She hurt her legs, actually. And she was in the bush to the left and further in. You can't see her in the photo, but when I was taking these photos, I was talking to her. I don't know what became of her story, but Tomas actually had to stop digging because Border Patrol ended up showing up. And what was interesting was that there were Mexican, they wouldn't identify themselves. I don't want to say police, but there were two Mexican men on ATVs, and they were actually working with Border Patrol. And they were trying to be very nice about, you know, what they were doing. They were trying to be very sneaky about it. Also, sometimes when you're working alone and it, you know, it starts to get dark, this is a mistake I made. Luckily, nothing happened. You get so into photographing and then realizing, like, holy crap, you know, not in the best place to you know, to be documenting. And I learned that pretty quickly, but again, nothing happening. My main focus were my subjects, but even as photojournalists, we need to be aware of our surroundings. So when I look at this photo, I could see why people might think it's staged. It wasn't staged. This photo was at a shelter near Benito Juarez, where at least 5,800 people were staying. By this point, that shelter had been closed down due to unsanitary reasons. And some people were staying in this shelter. At night, they didn't have any light, and I don't think they had running water, but I need to double check that. So I saw this scene where this man was holding an American flag, and I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, again, I could see why people might think it's staged. I do, but I found it really interesting, and I still do. And this is why I'm sharing it. I mean, all three of them are lost in thought, and I feel like I caught them at an interesting moment. Same with this young man. He was at a shelter as well, the same shelter where he's standing by his belongings and was actually asked to leave. But I know he decided at that point that he was going to stay. But anyway, he's lit up by what looks like a flashlight. And we didn't say much, we just stared at each other. And he actually has food in his hands. But yeah, it's quite interesting when documenting in Mexico. We hear so many stories as to why people are leaving, but I just think it's so important. And I made a few mistakes here, and I want to talk about that. Everyone has a name, and I think it's sometimes we get so wrapped up when we're documenting, at least I do, where, you know, something interesting is happening in front of you, and then you walk away and you're like, man, I wish, you know, I wish I knew that person's story, because everyone has a story. And I think it's important that we tell them the best that we can. This was taken right before New Year's. Now, I wasn't there on New Year's Day when the tear gas happened. This is again in Tijuana, but this was taken right before New Year's Eve, actually. This woman is looking through the border fence, talking to Border Patrol, and she's crying and pleading. She, along with other people, wanted to seek asylum. Now, what was interesting about this moment is Border Patrol actually told us that, I told them, I apologize, the migrants, if media leaves, being the photographers, we might think about allowing you guys to come over. And of course, they were very upset with us, being the migrants, asking us to leave. And we just thought that was a little, I mean, we couldn't leave, right? And we didn't believe Border Patrol. And I even remember Border Patrol saying to a photographer, like, are you trying to get on the cover of Time? You guys think, you know, he was basically, I guess, trying to intimidate us. And I remember my colleague saying, like, yeah, who isn't trying to get on the cover of Time, trying to be a smartass? But yeah, again, we all left around the same time. This was early morning in Tijuana in late December. And I don't know, because there were so many people that were trying to seek asylum, I don't know what became of this group, if they made their way across or not. Now I want to talk about the border in general. So Mexico is just so full of culture and color. Now the border to me isn't just about people trying to cross and seek asylum. And it's, so this is Friendship Park, and it has many murals. As you can see, part of the American flag and this accordion player. I did a photo essay on Friendship Park about a year ago, and I'm still very passionate about this essay because I think it came out the way, it came out beautifully for me. This accordion player, he actually doesn't go to Tijuana very often, and he's part of a band and they play on the US side, and he just wanted to see what was happening that day. And again, you would think that I staged this photo, but I didn't. And so I feel like I caught him in a moment. And so let's move on. So this was interesting. This is a group of artists and migrants that were working on a mural. I thought there was something so beautiful about this. Migrants from Central America painting a mural with artists. I feel like this day I was there at the right time, and I got to speak to them a little bit and about why they were there. And the mural was about unity. And I thought that was, especially now and during that time, that was huge. Now the border doesn't always have to be like thinking Border Patrol and, you know, again, looking at all the colors, and believe it or not, there's tons of birds flying around. And no, I did not put any bread for them to fly around, but yeah, trying to show the different sides of the border is important to me, because again, it's just so visual. This was interesting. A woman by, her name just slipped my mind, I'm so sorry. A teacher in LA brought students from junior high and high school down to the border. It was on a Sunday, to perform before church service. And a lot of them never been there before. And what was fascinating about this was the Pastor Guillermo Navarrete, and I'm probably butchering his name. If he's watching, he might kill me. But he asked the students before they went back to LA, if you can leave with one word, what would it be after witnessing the border? And also too, let me preface by, you see people in the back and they're visiting their families. Some of them hadn't seen each other in years. So when asked this question, some of these students said hopeful and inspiring. And I just thought that was amazing. And here is Pastor Guillermo holding a church service. Usually on the other side, on the US side, there is someone holding a service as well. But that day he was not there. This woman is named Isabella. She's Mexican, and she was visiting her sons along with her husband on the left. She's talking to her grandchildren. She hadn't seen her kids in 15 years. 15 years. Her one son brought her grandkids across, and that's how she was talking to her kids, through that fence. And you can barely see people through the fence. And her sons were there illegally with their wives. So they risked their lives to go see their parents. at Borderfield State Park to talk to them through a fence. And before they left, because Borderfield State Park closes at 2, I believe, they looked, it was fascinating. They turned around to look at the fence one last time. The kids had left, their sons had left, but they took one last look. Here is the Binational Garden. Dan Watman, I believe, he started this in 2007. Now the Binational Garden is on both sides. I think it's safe to say, I haven't been there quite some time, but on the Mexican side, it usually looks a little nicer. Maybe because I think their access is a lot better. So you always see mariachi players or musicians, and I'm actually working on a series on musicians, but this isn't part of it. Here you have some musicians playing at Playas de Tijuana. And again, going with the Mexican culture, it's just full of life, so colorful. These guys are actually quite comical, and my Spanish used to be good once upon a time, so I got to practice my Spanish on them. So I've also worked in Hidalgo and Tapachula. I've been there a couple of times, and this is a photo of Hidalgo. On the other side is Guatemala. What's fascinating about this place, so when I was there, I actually witnessed a smuggler waiting for what looked like Cubans, but if I'm not sure, I shouldn't assume, but young men that were crossing illegally. They were trying to make their way to the border, to the US border, US-Mexico border. And also when documenting, we have to be very careful. I actually snuck this photo. The smuggler is to the top left, and he had a headset. So actually an earpiece, sorry. And sometimes, again, going back to, you get caught up in these moments where you're like, oh my God, I have to get this. What is interesting about this scene is I grabbed a couple of photos, and I was working with the writer, and we were actually going to stay longer, but the smuggler ended up coming back, and the writer felt very uncomfortable. And when we got to the car, our tires were almost, or one tire was almost flat. So I couldn't imagine if things didn't work out in our favor. So you, again, always have to have a good plan. And sometimes it just didn't work out that way, but always getting lucky. This is in Tapachula. So the few times that I went there, we would see migrants from Africa, a few from the Middle East and Haiti, and of course, Cuba and Central America. They were waiting for their exit visa. And there was actually a lot of tension. Some of the scenes I saw were pregnant women sleeping outside, also using the restroom where they were cooking their food. One time a writer and I went not too far from this location where we saw this scene, and we didn't see anybody at that point helping any organizations, and people were asking for money. And it sucks because I feel like a starving artist a lot of times. But the writer and I talked to each other, and we said, we have to do something. You just can't, it just didn't feel right to talk to people and not bring at least, whether it be toilet paper and snacks and paper towels. And it to me, it didn't feel right. And that's what we did. And we were also worried that, well, there's tons of people. What if they see this? Will there be a riot? But none of that happened. And they were willing to talk to us regardless. But sometimes, in your heart what the right move is. And I feel like that was the right move. It's more people. This was in Hidalgo. Again, meeting families that were hoping to make it to the US-Mexico border, having a hell of a time. They didn't necessarily want to share their story, and I had to respect that. And I imagine it was not a great story. Sometimes you have to learn when not to push. And so I didn't push. But they said I could photograph, not really focusing on the faces so much. So I grabbed this photo. I'm gonna keep going. This is not. So this was, again, in Tijuana. So right before, this woman actually jumped with her son and a husband. So this scene, and you can't tell from this photo, there was a man that the family was on somebody's property, and this man actually, because I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back a bit. There were other people that were trying to cross as well, and the man's property, the man who owned it said he wanted people to pay. And this woman, I remember saying, like, you know, have a heart, right? There was Border Patrol on the other side. So again, they weren't trying to sneak one in, right? They were trying to seek asylum because waiting at the shelter was not feasible anymore. They couldn't do it. Now remember, a lot of these people don't have much money, right? So what are you to do? You could wait in a border town, which Tijuana isn't the safest place. So this is what they did, jumped the fence. So this is her right before she jumped. Again, this was a migrant caravan, but this was in the spring of 2018, children playing. I think it's important that we show the humanity. I'm not always looking for, you know, oh, there's someone that's sad, or I'm not looking for those types of photos. I'm looking to show what is happening, whether someone is happy, whether someone is sad, whether, you know, and I feel like I caught an interesting moment with these kids playing with the Mexican flag in the background. This is another shelter. Just gonna skip forward a little bit, sorry. I feel like I'm running out of time. Also, when documenting the border, I didn't just document in Tijuana and Tapachula and Hidalgo, but I actually made my way to El Paso. And I guess you could say exploring different borders and trying to understand the landscape. This is in Nogales, and it just seemed so desolate, and there was just something so beautiful about it, which sounds very strange with the border fence dividing it, but it was to me. And so you could see Border Patrol, and again, US side, obviously. This is in Nogales, and you could see how homes are so close to the fence. And I know I've even seen this in Tijuana, but I'm still amazed how, you know, we are so close sometimes, and how we're divided by a border fence, but how different our lives are. I mean, yeah, it's quite fascinating. This is a woman looking through the border fence, actually, in Tijuana, talking to her relatives. Same thing. So this is in Tecate, and I actually, right after this photo was taken, I was working with another photographer. Thankfully, I was not alone, and we saw an interesting, not too far from this location, we saw an interesting situation happening, which we thought could have been migrants getting ready to cross. But a man actually, we saw it, and from the corner of our eyes, he was getting closer, but at that point it was dark, and you could see the shadow, and he was very tall. I'm 5'3", and my friend isn't really tall either. And he started to throw rocks at us. Again, yeah, wanting to tell stories, but having to make sure that we need to take care of ourselves too. Talking to my friend, like, is it worth it? You know, we stuck around for a little bit, obviously walking away from the man who was throwing rocks. He didn't want us to be there. But yeah, sometimes you have to know when it's time to walk away and maybe say, we'll go back another day. I thought this was interesting. This was in Tecate on the Mexican side as well. And you could see the new border fence, the new wall with the old. And I just thought, God, this is crazy. Like, look at the scale of that. And that's why I like this photo, is because of the scale. I believe that's all for my photos. Oops.
Thank you, Ariana. Those are fantastic, and we look forward to talking more about them. I now want to introduce Alfredo Corchado, who is the Mexico border correspondent for the Dallas Morning News and author of two amazing works, Midnight in Mexico, A Reporter's Journey Through a Country's Descent into Darkness, and Homelands, For Friends to Countries in the Fate of the Great Mexican-American Migration. Alfredo was born in Durango, Mexico, and raised in California and Texas. He worked the fields of California's San Joaquin Valley alongside his parents, who were members of the United Farm Workers Union led by Cesar Chavez. He was a Harvard Nieman Fellow and the winner of two very distinguished journalism awards, the Maria Moores Cabot Prize for Bravery and Enterprise, and the Elijah Parrish Lovejoy Award for Courage in Journalism. And this year, he was named Texas's Star Reporter of the Year. He has reported on the reach of Mexican drug cartels into the United States, the plight of Mexican and Central American immigrants in the US, and government corruption on both sides of the border. He is former director of the Borderlands program at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University. Alfredo lives between El Paso and Mexico City, but calls the border his home. He actually tonight, just before we started this program, returned from a reporting trip where he was working on coverage of the coronavirus and the border. He will talk tonight about that and what it means for migration from Central America, and also what a post-Trump era on the border might look like. Please welcome Alfredo.
Hello. I'll get this. Hi. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, and it's great to be back at Harvard virtually. It's a pleasure to be here, and watching Ariana's presentation, I feel like maybe we just go straight into Q&A. But just real quick, I want to say I've been the Mexico bureau chief at the Dallas Morning News since March of this year, when the pandemic hit. I've been on the border, mostly covering the pandemic and the situation in Mexico and the United States. I just want to maybe talk about three stories that have had a powerful impact, not just on me as a journalist, but I think on many of the people who read the Dallas Morning News. First story is a Guatemalan father and a young boy, Joaquin, from a little town near Antigua, and his son Fernando. Are you guys there?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I feel like I'm frozen in time. I met Joaquin and Fernando about a year ago, and during this last year, I've been following them from their trip from Guatemala to Ciudad Juarez. They now live in North Texas, and I was able to sort of witness their travels through Mexico, through the border, and their stay as he tries to get find his footing in this new country. And then there's a story about Jamila Nahunho, a woman from Uganda who came through Ciudad Juarez, was stuck there, and actually her fate was very tragic. She died in a hospital in Ciudad Juarez. But it was interesting how advocates, immigrant rights advocates from the US and Mexico were trying to find a way to recover her body and send her body back to Uganda to her relatives. But it took the Black Lives Movement to actually pressure Mexican authorities to release the body. And instead of sending her back to Uganda, Mexican authorities actually built a cemetery for her in Ciudad Juarez. And it was a little patch of land that was also dedicated to Muslim immigrants. The story that has really, I think, grabbed readers, and obviously has been on the news, has been lately the pandemic, and how the pandemic in many ways exasperated President Trump's effort to shut down the border. So you're seeing immigrants being deported under Title 42, which is basically mass deportations of Mexicans and other immigrants through the border. The story I was telling Anne-Marie that I've been covering is how there's been a shelter that was set up to help people who are crisscrossing the border. It was a little hotel set up to take in victims of coronavirus and sort of isolate them. They're now out of money. And so the whole idea is to try to, how do you protect people who have been crisscrossed, that have been living in the United States for years? One person I've been following is a guy named Luis, who lived in the United States for 28 years. Over the Labor Day weekend, he was out with his kids, essentially spending the weekend before school. He was stopped by police, local police, asked for his driver's license. This is the guy fishing with his sons. And next thing he knows, the Border Patrol arrives. He's thrown in this detention center. And for 10 days, he's being moved around from Utah, Nevada, Seattle, lands in Ciudad Juarez, and landed in El Paso on the 15th of September, right before the Mexican independence. I met him as he was crossing into Ciudad Juarez with about 100 other immigrants that had just been deported. And it was interesting talking to Luis about his experience in the United States. He hadn't been back in Mexico in 28 years. And he was going back to a country he really didn't recognize, really didn't know. We kept in touch for days. He gets back to Puebla, and next thing he knows, his family, his friends, people he knew when he was a kid, basically stayed away from him, fearful that he might have COVID. And like many others, Luis decided that it was more important to try to get back to his family in Southern California, cross the border, and without documents, obviously. And that's something, I think, the trend that we're about to see is the high migration of Mexicans and of Central Americans because of the coronavirus, because it has torn so much into the economies that, when I wrote Homelands, there was, the whole idea was, this is the end of the Mexican migration. And I went back and during the editing process, I thought, what if there's an earthquake? What if, I wasn't even thinking of a pandemic, but what if there is something so huge that you will see Mexican migration resurge? And I think that's what we're beginning to see in the last few months, that the numbers of Mexicans crossing back to the United States has increased, and they're taking the place of many from Central America who actually ended up going back to the country. But we are now getting reports at least as I've been visiting shelters, that they're getting a heads up from coordinators back on the southern border and in Central America to expect a resurgence in the migration north. So one of the things, right after the election, the November 3rd election, I was talking to Joaquin, the Guatemalan guy, and he says, is it true that everything's going to go back to normal again? That they're going to end the MPP program, the Migration Protection Protocol, in which Mexico basically acted as the large, giant asylum for the Trump administration. This is where thousands of immigrants have been waiting for them to make their plea, to make their asylum case. And the sense that Central Americans are already getting kind of excited about a Biden administration, I think puts a little, there's a sense that maybe the Trump era is over, but as some of the immigrants I've talked to since then say, well, it wasn't really a resounding defeat of Trump. I mean, Trump might be gone, but Trumpism is alive and well. And I think that's what really gives a lot of people on the border a sense of pause as to what may happen next. Is there a post-Trump era? And I think the answer, even from the Biden administration, as we talk to them, is they're they're trying to be very cautious and temper expectations. We've been talking to people close to the administration who have said, anything that happens will be a gradual change. Vice President Biden did tell us in an interview back in August that one thing's for sure, he will not continue building a wall. It doesn't mean he's going to knock down the wall, but he won't be adding more to it. And in the end, there were billions of dollars spent for essentially, the Trump administration might say, it's 450 miles that they built, but in reality, places where there was no new fence, we're looking at about 12 miles of new border. And obviously the story that has now taken all of our attention on the border has been the spread of COVID-19. El Paso, Ciudad Juarez are now ground zero for the spread of the infection. There's at least 10 mobile morgues that have been set up in El Paso. And the situation has gotten so bad over the weekend that they actually have allowed prisoners who have volunteered to help the county pick up bodies. And as bad as the situation is in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, it's even worse. I mean, there are reports of people fighting in hospitals, patients and nurses because they can't find hospital beds. I've asked a doctor over the weekend, how bad is the situation now? And he says, it's as bad as it was in Italy, it's as bad as it was in Spain, where people are physicians are having to make decisions of whether someone lives or not because they're running out of beds, they're running out of resources. And we're not even in the winter time, so you can only expect the situation to get worse in the weeks and months ahead as the virus spreads throughout the country and throughout Texas. We've had 1,500 volunteers in the area, and I think the fear is that people will start leaving, and then what happens? So why don't I just leave it at that and go to Q&A.
Thank you, Alfredo. Great to hear you think out loud as always. And Ariana, do you want to join us back again with your screen?
I'm back.
There she is. Thank you both. And just a reminder to those who are with us tonight, please add your questions to the Q&A, which some of you have already done. Thank you. I wanted to start with asking you about conditions for working at the border. Alfredo, I happen to know your life has been threatened for your work in Mexico. Ariana, you discovered you were part of a secret database that the U.S. government was keeping of names of journalists who were covering the migrant caravan story, and in some cases had alerts placed on their passports that caused journalists to be detained or from lawfully entering Mexico. But I also am thinking tonight about the Mexican journalists who might be covering this story. We know that Mexico, for many stories, is the most dangerous country in the world to be a journalist. I don't know how much that applies to the border story, though, and to the migration story. So I'm wondering if you could each just say a bit about conditions, both for you in working there, for telling these stories, but also for our Mexican colleagues.
Ariana?
Do you want me to start? Okay. Yeah, so for me, honestly, I feel like my issues were with Border Patrol, and that really changed how I worked when covering the migrant caravan and other border stories. Meaning, if I wasn't shooting for a wire, if I could file photos later, I wouldn't bring my laptop. Also, I have a tracker on my phone for my sister to see where I'm going in case she doesn't hear from me by a certain time. Honestly, it's kind of strange because I've been to Mexico so many times to the border, and I didn't see chaos until this year when covering COVID stories. And meaning, I saw a dead body on the ground when I was headed to a cemetery to photograph funerals happening. And then the next day when I went back to Tijuana, the same thing. Actually, not the same thing, I apologize. There was a shootout and the cop actually survived. And the reason he survived is because the hitmen were lousy hitmen. So that was lucky for him. Now, the Mexican journalists, I feel, are dealing with way more intensity than I am, because I get to come to the US side. I'm not living and breathing it. And I think it's quite different, honestly. And some of the people covering migration are also covering stories about organized gangs and cartel stories. So I feel like it's much more dangerous for some of them.
Alfredo?
Maria, I mean, as we know, we talked in the past. I mean, the situation for Mexican journalists is much more intense. I mean, I cover drug trafficking in Mexico, drug organizations, and the reason why I landed at the Neiman program was because I had a death threat from cartels. This is back in 2007, 2008. I mean, in that period, the situation in Mexico was just beginning to crumble. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Mexico, and I happen to look very Mexican and very proud of it. But that did get me into a situation that was very dicey, and it also kind of opened my eyes to a situation that my colleagues in Mexico have been exposed. When I received the death threat, I mean, it was sobering and also humbling to know that the U.S. government actually, would put out a press release, that the U.S. Embassy would put out a press release and say, thou shalt not touch an American journalist. Mm-hmm. That also opened my eyes to how little protection our colleagues in Mexico get. And because of who I am as an American citizen, I felt like I had the protection to keep asking questions and keep covering these issues. Because in Mexico, more so today under this administration, I mean, in Mexico, there are these regions that we call zonas de silencio, zones of silence, where there's very little reporting that's being done because of the reach of the cartels. And I think one of the things that COVID has done, that the pandemic has done, is we've taken our eyes off of Mexico. But the situation for Mexican journalists have gotten much worse. in the last few months. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, there was a journalist who was gunned down as he was leaving Ciudad Juarez to come to El Paso. It was just reported over the weekend that it was a case of mistaken identity. The shooters got the wrong car, and so they shot this journalist, very well known on both sides of the border. But at the same time, you know, we keep hearing reports of other journalists. I think what I've learned now being in the United States and living in the United States is I wonder whether with the atmosphere that we live under as journalists in the U.S., I often wonder whether I would take the same chances that I took less than a decade ago. I mean, where the United States was once a shining example for other countries and for other journalists from around from other countries. I mean, especially our Mexican colleagues, they look to the U.S. as a beacon, you know, freedom of expression and protection. You know, we are now called fake news, and I mean, I don't even want to get into all that, but I often wonder whether I would have taken the same chances. Whether I also question whether a U.S. embassy would have even put out a press release about protecting an American journalist. That's a debate I often have. On the border these days, we've seen the resurgence of violence in Ciudad Juarez, but again, COVID's become such an important story and such a big story that I think it overlooks the other things that are happening right next door to this country. But the violence is gone. I mean, it's gotten so much worse that it's COVID and the economy that I think are going to push the next wave of migration from Mexico. It's no longer, you know, just looking for the new opportunity, but I think regions of Mexico that were once pretty prosperous, like in central Mexico, El Bajío, Querétaro, Guanajuato, are now engulfed in violence. And we're seeing more and more people seeking asylum from those regions, places that I never thought I would see a surge of Mexican migration.
So
Thank you.
oh, I'm so sorry. I just want to ask a quick question because I noticed in Tijuana during the pandemic an increase in violence. So it's interesting the same thing is going on there as well.
Right.
And so do you think that's because of COVID? You would just would think during a pandemic that violence would kind of slow down a bit.
No, I think that there's a pandemic. I mean, a lot of the businesses that were closed, that have been closed, quite as bad as people might think, you know, a lockdown in the United States is, you know, or people basically ask not to go out, not to shop, not to do non-essential activities. And quite as of now, I mean, only one person can go into a shopping mall. Restaurants are closed, bars are closed. So what happens to the domestic market, the drug traffickers' domestic market? I remember back in March, as I was crossing from Juarez and El Paso and doing my reporting, one of the things that these businesses said, you know, you're about to see violence spike because their business is now over, essentially. I mean, their domestic market is been really ripped apart. And so that's what we're seeing more and more. Plus the migration, I mean, as we were saying earlier, it's these organized criminal organizations don't just deal with drugs, but also with human smuggling. With being out of business, I mean, there's a rise in extortions, there's a rise in robberies. It's no longer just about drug trafficking, but overall organized crime.
I'm curious about a different sort of challenge that you both face, and that's kind of a fact deficit and the rhetorical challenges in framing this very important story. And I'm going to use a quote from a talk you gave once at Neiman, Alfredo, to set this up, and I'm curious how you both think about this. You said the border is not a geographical place, but a mindset. The border is not a no man's land overrun by hordes of criminals in need of a wall to separate us from them. Undocumented migration is at a historic low. Every day, 1.7 billion in trade crosses between Mexico and the US. This means the two sides have never been so intertwined, yet so misunderstood and divided. In my years as a correspondent, my job has mostly revolved around two things, both long-standing vices for Americans: America's insatiable demand for drugs and undocumented workers who serve as cheap labor. Mexicans are the enablers for America's charade. I'm really curious how each of you think about approaching telling the story that is so steeped in mythology, not to mention demagoguery, and how you find a way to let the facts speak louder than those myths.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go, Alfred? I guess I'll go. That's actually a great question. So during the caravan coverage, I can't tell you how many heated discussions I've had with friends that are conservative and friends that are not, but immigration is a very heated subject for them. And it's kind of interesting when somebody who doesn't work at the border is telling you how things are, right? Everyone's trying to come in, right? It's chaos. Everyone's trying, the way they make it sound like Trump, how he said, oh, it's like an invasion, right? Or someone called it an invasion. And he was commenting on that. And it's like, no, that's not the case. I hope that my photos will explain it, right? And sometimes, like some of the photos I shared today when I said, oh, Border Patrol is on the other side, I have photos of Border Patrol on the other side, right? I mean, just giving that as an example. But unfortunately, because things are so polarized, you could have the proof in front of somebody and they're still going to believe what they're going to believe. I mean, even with, unfortunately, my own Mexican mother, it's like, no, it's right here, but no, I'm seeing something else. And so it gets quite frustrating. And, what you read from Alfredo, that is eloquent. And I sometimes wish I was a writer because I feel like my words aren't as eloquent as yours. But yeah, I mean, even this day, just dealing with other things and people are saying fake news, right? And but if you have the proof and no one wants to believe you, what do you say? What do you say at that point? You're arguing, and you don't want to argue, but you're talking to a wall, and but does that mean that you give up? No, hell no, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying, But I also think that puts, I don't want to say an added pressure because we should always try to be great at our jobs, but a pressure to, to do the best we can, and you want to, right, and get the story right. So,
that's a great question, Anne-Marie, and what a way to bring us down. I really feel like the divisions in this country are such that it doesn't matter what you do, I mean, or the facts that you use. And I'm always looking for facts, not just from the U.S. government, but from the Mexican government, from worldwide organizations to make a case. And really, the best thing, my experience has been to, tell the human story. I mean, focus the story on people as much as you can. And even then, I mean, oftentimes I will get pushback from readers who say, how do you know that person's story is real? I mean, I remember going to Guatemala, and this was the first time that I had ever been confused or people took me for a drug trafficker, because I was there. I had my I say gafete, my press credential, to show I worked for the Dallas Morning News. I had a credential from the State Department, etc. And I remember this woman came up to me from Guatemala and said, "No, you're not with the press. You're with some organization from the border, and you're here to recruit people to come up north." And I kept saying, I was really kind of fascinated. So I went into reporter mode and just started asking questions. And I found out that there are a lot of traffickers who go down and they will paint this rosy picture of the United States and help lure people north. But I mean, that example is an example that I find also in the United States, that you will tell somebody's story and they will say, well, no, you're working for someone else. I mean, I think this is such a divided time. I mean, especially living on the border. I mean, the border is more than just a geographical place. I mean, it's a mindset. But I think the border, as we head forward and go, in the post-Trump administration, I think the border is also a peek into the future. I mean, a place of tolerance and a place of healing. I think the border can teach the rest of the country, how to heal and maybe how to believe in facts again. It doesn't matter how many times I tell people, this is one of the safest communities ever. I mean, if it's San Diego, if it's El Paso, Laredo, McAllen, I mean, they are some of the safest communities in the United States. They still won't believe you. I mean, you can put the facts there, but like Ariana, I mean, I'm not going to give up on that. I mean, I think, I also said that journalism is like, it's this passion in you that you want to keep pushing back and fighting and with truth. You tell people the truth, because I think in the end, truth will matter.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, you can't give up. We can't give up, and it's just not an option. So I agree.
Thank you both. There's some really good questions forming in the queue, so I'm going to start sharing some of those with you from the people who are with us tonight. Ariana, there's an interesting one for you about, you mentioned that photographing migrants can be dangerous for them. The question is, do you show them the pictures that you've taken to see if they approve? Do you have any kind of contingency plan if they change their minds after the photograph has been uploaded to the internet? Has this ever happened to you?
That's a fantastic question. No, so usually an example, say I'm in a shelter, right? And I want to interview someone and I ask them if I can take their photo. Usually they say yes or no. It's very rare. I haven't been in that situation where they changed their mind. Actually, no, I take that back. I'm so sorry. One time it happened, and the writer had a contact with the person that she interviewed and who I photographed. And so before it went to press, I didn't file the photo. So that was that one time. And I sometimes show photos on the camera, just to show them like, hey, this is what you look like. And there've been other times, on a side note, where I'll bring a Polaroid, just so that they have something for a keepsake. That's a fantastic question.
But I think sometimes I found, if I can add to that, I mean, I find that it's also the job of the reporter or the photographer, sometimes when I'm working with colleagues, to sort of protect the person from themselves. I mean, oftentimes they will tell you way too much, and it's happened in my situation where I will say, well, I'm not sure you want all this information if you're making a case for asylum, because this story is going to go out in Spanish, and your family back in Guatemala or back in Mexico, people in your hometown may read this, and they may actually come back and hurt you. I mean, the other thing I always try to do as a reporter, we have people on the Mexican side of the border who will provide a lot of information, and I'm always thinking of their safety first. You want to bring them to a place that's safe, and find I mean, I will sometimes call people and say, this is what I'm saying in tomorrow's edition or tonight's edition, whatever it is. I want to make sure this doesn't get you in trouble. I want to make sure, because I mean, we're talking about life and death. I mean, gone are the days of migration. Family came for. I mean, now it's literally people running for their lives, and so that always weighs heavily on my mind. Is how do you protect the souls?
Yeah, I've actually, to piggyback off that, I've actually changed names before. So I've done the same where someone will give me a name, and depending on their story, I've changed the first name or the last name. So I've done that too.
There's someone who's interested in doing research on the border, but is concerned about organized crime. And the question is whether or not, whether you've ever had any run-ins with organized crime or seen any activity, I guess, of that nature, and how it impacts the communities waiting to ask for asylum on the US side.
Do you want me? I'm always like, who wants to go? I can go. So that's an interesting question. I personally have not. I remember speaking to somebody near the border. It was I was photographing a story, and we talked about organized crime, actually saying that, you know, I've never had any run-ins as of yet. And he said, he goes, we're always being watched. And I said, well, that's kind of creepy. And I said, well, how come I haven't had any issues? He's like, because you're not doing anything on organized crime, or, you know, you said you're working on stories about migration. And again, you know, there have been times where I'm about to photograph somebody, and sometimes somebody can give you a look. Actually, it happens whether you're in the Middle East, the US, Mexico, it doesn't matter. Someone will give you a look like, don't you dare take my photo, right? For various reasons. And you got to respect that, whether they're involved in something or because they're scared or whatever. You got to respect it. But I personally have not had any issues. I've actually had more issues with Antifa folks than in Mexico from, I think, Seattle, than I have any organized criminals. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I dedicated a whole book to that. Midnight in Mexico. It's not a plug for the book, but I've had some serious run-ins with members of organized crime, and it's I've actually had one student from Harvard who ended up going with me to the border to do work on a research, and it happened. I think she ended up writing an article in the New York Times about the incident where we were crossing the border. When you cross the border, I mean, the first thing you look out for are the so-called lookouts, los halcones. And these are the eyes and ears of a cartel, and you can usually spot them because they're the ones looking at you, and they either have a cell phone. Like today, I mean, one of the reasons I was running late is I stopped right as I was about to cross the bridge, and there was a person just standing there by himself, and I kind of wonder, why is this person here? And I started taking pictures, and he gave me that look, like, don't you dare. And you just know that look to know that this person is hired by someone else to keep an eye on certain things. So you kind of just go on, go your way. By the way, I don't want to leave this hanging, but the person from Harvard, the student, ended up doing, I think, a really good research, so everything was fine.
So is there any particular advice or caution or, suggestions you would give this questioner if they do go to the border to do research?
acorchado@dallasnews.com. I mean, you can send me a question, but as a reporter, I always believe in transparency. And I believe that if I go into a town where I know there's organized crime, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the mayor's office, and I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to say who I am, and I'm going to tell the police who I am, because I want them to know that I am there. I mean, it's like this reporter who was killed 2 weeks ago. I mean, mistaken identity. I want to make sure that they know that I'm a journalist, and hopefully that there are consequences if something happens. I mean, this is the naive side of me that wants people to believe that. But I also believe that there's when you're dealing with high members of organized crime, I mean, they are. I think they're pretty smart, and they don't want to do anything that's going to have blowback for them. But my concern are the lower level people, the lower level lieutenants, who oftentimes may be high on drugs or may be trying to score points with the higher ups, and they may take a chance, and just because you looked at them the wrong way, or because they think you might be an informant or work for the DEA or work for the FBI, something may go wrong. So I'm of the mindset that the more you're upfront with them, you tell them, and that doesn't mean I will flaunt things. I mean, if I go to say a Nuevo Laredo where I know that the cartels are fighting with each other, I mean, I'm not going to linger around for hours. I'm going to do my work, do my interviews, and then get back to the US side. But you really, I mean, I like going with it there with the photographer or with the camera person. I mean, I like going with oftentimes when I can to go in a group, because I think there is protection in numbers.
So hopefully that is very helpful to the questioner. So Ariana, you had some really striking photos of families visiting their family members through the fence at the border. And the question is, do undocumented individuals on the US side risk visiting their family members through the fence at the border, or does Border Patrol leave them alone?
Yeah, so they do risk going there if they are undocumented. And I haven't seen, I've been there so many times, but it doesn't mean that there hasn't been an issue. I've never witnessed Border Patrol asking for identity, right? So I haven't seen that issue. And that's always a risk, right? When you're visiting a family member on the Mexican side to talk to them through the fence. But yeah, I haven't seen it.
There's been some efforts here, Anne-Marie, and it actually happened it started in San Diego. We had organized efforts by immigrant rights activists who will have, in El Paso at least, the event was called Hugs on the Border, where for hours or a moment in time, families could come from the interior of the United States and visit family from the interior of Mexico, and they meet up at the wall, at the fence, and essentially hug each other. But there's this period of we're not going to ask for your documentation or your status. You can have that moment to yourself. That also went away, I think, in the second year of the Trump administration.
Yeah, because I do remember that. I think I saw that about once or twice, and then yeah, it stopped.
And we have two questions about coronavirus and the border. The first from our friend and colleague June Ehrlich, who says, I've seen reports that despite the coronavirus, remittances to Mexico are actually going up. Is that true? And how does it factor into your prediction, Alfredo, that there will be a surge in Mexican immigration?
That is true, dear June. There is a sense from a lot of immigrants in the United States that this may be their last year or their last season. There are places in Mexico where you go and you see furious people building homes and trying to get the place ready because of the uncertainties in the United States. That's happening. You also see, especially in the farm working business, where people are trying to lure Mexicans back to the United States to do these essential jobs. I think the hope among a lot of immigrants during this coronavirus period is that maybe their work is essential enough to actually get a legal status. I mean, that remains to be seen. I mean, without stimulus, I mean, you are seeing in many places the unemployment go up. And I think people are really frightened and scared that you're going to have more of a battle between the immigrants and the non-immigrants. I mean, it's kind of interesting what we saw along the U.S.-Mexico border during the elections, where you had a high number of Latinos actually vote for President Trump in a region that was not very conservative, that was not very Republican. And you go back and you do the interviews and you talk to people, a lot of it had to do with the sense of jobs. People want to protect their jobs. And there's a sense, if you came before, you want to stop the future wave of immigration. That's something that's going to be interesting, I think, in 2021, as we see the Biden administration, to what extent are we going to see that anti-immigrant feeling? Because I mean, we've seen it among the German experience, the Irish experience, the Polish experience, the Italian experience, where at some point you kind of turn your back against to the new arrivals.
Yeah, it's a long American story, isn't it?
Sorry
Um,
about
And the other related question from Kathleen McTeague is, so she notes that we've talked about coronavirus and the Biden administration as factors that could motivate more migration, but her question is, what about the catastrophic hurricanes?
That's exactly what we've been seeing the last few days in Central America. And that's why these shelters are very concerned about running out of funds, because they do see, I mean, they are hearing from people on the ground. There's another natural disaster in Central America. Get ready for the new wave. I mean, what happens under a Biden López Obrador administration? I mean, it's curious that here we are 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks after the elections, and the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has yet to congratulate President-elect Biden. I mean, what happens to this relationship, this bilateral relationship between the United States and Mexico? That's going to be, I think, a very interesting phenomenon. You know, will the state, will the National Guard still be there to serve as a wall between both countries? Will Mexico continue to be the asylum refuge for so many thousands of people? So many questions to explore next year. But definitely, I mean, there is a sense that there's a new wave coming from Mexico and from Central America, and especially in a pandemic. I mean, they don't have the infrastructure in place to prepare for that.
There's a interesting question from, and I apologize, I'm probably going to mispronounce your name, Sinai Gabretical, who writes, I'm a young person who's trying to learn about US immigration. When I've spoken to people, they say the reason why the US can allow a certain amount of immigrants from everywhere in a certain amount of time is because the US currently does not have enough benefits for their current citizens, like universal health care, financial aid, unemployment, etc. And that if they have more people, prices of homes will go up, taxes will go up, etc., and they cannot financially afford it with the US deficit. People feel as though the US needs to fix issues for people who are already here before taking on, quote, too many, close quote, people from one place at one time. What is a good response to these concerns? Also, as far as seeking asylum, where do people in Mexico seek asylum if they cannot get through at the US border? So I think that's just, it's a fundamental question about this, you know, again, the political rhetoric that we're all kind of living with. And the questioner is asking, what's a response to that?
Well, I mean, that's, I guess, a question that I faced since I came to this country. I came to this country at the age of 6. And we worked in the San Joaquin Valley in California in the fields as farm workers for most of my teenage life. I mean, that's what we did. And the question was always, you know, if we were not out in the fields, would the growers raise the prices? Would they pay more in wages? Well, guess what? I mean, 30 years after I left the fields, or 40 years after I left the fields, the growers have raised the prices because the number of Mexicans working in the fields has dwindled to such a small number that they're trying to keep them. I mean, and just real quick, I mean, the story of my immigration from my town in Durango in Mexico, we had a trajectory where it was Durango, the border, and then California. In the last 30 years since Reagan, with immigration reform, a lot of these workers ended up leaving California. They became legalized and they started populating other parts of the country, Colorado, Oklahoma, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so there was much more competition for jobs, and there were less people going to the fields. That forced the growers to raise prices to get more more people working in the fields, and even during the pandemic. I mean, I did a story this spring for the New York Times, looking at how these growers were so desperate to bring in more people to do this essential work that they were forced to pay hourly wages. I think in some places, wages went from $13 an hour to $22 an hour, and still they can't find enough workers.
Ariana, do you want to address that? I mean, you must get this question all the time, that you have to personally respond to.
Yeah, I was trying to think of what my answer would be, and I don't have a great answer, actually. I apologize.
I mean, I think the prices of vegetables will go up. I mean, yes, prices of homes will go up. One of the things that's interesting on the border is we find people that are saying, why are the gardeners charging so much more to do the lawns or to do the roofing? And the answer is simple. I mean, there are less Mexicans crossing. The United States and Mexico agreed to shut down the border to non-essential travel. So these days, you only have American citizens traveling to Mexico. You don't have Mexicans coming to the United States. So what does that mean? The prices have gone up for everything because you don't have competition from the Mexican side.
Well, actually, I'm going to interject. So in Mexicali, when I crossed from there to Calexico, what was interesting was Ryder and I, we were reporting for Reuters. We got in line at the border, and there were, and again, I don't know what it looked like before the pandemic, so I can't compare. But we were in line. We waited for 3 hours with these farmers to cross. And I have to imagine that line, was probably a lot longer. But just to interject, 3 hours during a pandemic, right? And so I have to imagine a lot of those people are probably not crossing like they used to. But even that's still pretty intense, 3 hours. But yeah, I have to agree with Alfredo. That's all I really wanted to say on that matter.
And to the last part of the question, what are the alternatives for Mexicans seeking asylum if they can't come to the US?
I think we're seeing the alternatives. I mean, people who are, the border communities are ballooning. I mean, in Ciudad Juarez, for example, we're seeing so many people from the interior of Mexico who are living there, and obviously in fear for their lives. They make asylums to the United States government, and they have to wait in Mexico. It's a human rights violation for them. There's a family that I've been following since January of this year, and they were running away from organized crime in the interior of Mexico. They're living there, but they live with this day-to-day fear that the cartels are going to somehow find them in Juarez and gun them down. And yet, there's like a sliver of hope in all this, because you see the human resiliency of people. I mean, right before the pandemic hit, I mean, there were so many Central Americans and Cubans and Venezolanos stuck on the border that they actually started to rebuild parts of Juarez that were run down by the cartels. These were the people who were suddenly, rebuilding neighborhoods where no one had set foot in years. Sort of like in Tijuana, when you had the Haitian community take over parts of Tijuana and gave it new life. Obviously with that pandemic, everything is on hold, but I think people feel that the resilient spirits of humanity will continue beyond.
Sean Kelly has a question that really gets at a larger debate that's going on in journalism right now about a number of issues. And the question is, do the participants in the discussion, the two of you, feel it's important for journalists and photojournalists to be impartial in their views so that readers and consumers of their stories on both sides of the debate feel they're getting the whole story? So how do you think about that much maligned word, objectivity, and fairness and your audiences and how you speak to them?
I think it's my friend who asked that question. So that's actually a great question. I told myself, you know, if I get to a point, if I can't be objective, there's going to be two answers to this. If I can't be objective with my work, then I probably should think about a different field. However, as human beings, right, it sometimes is a bit hard to, you know, say you meet a family who's fleeing violence and who's going through such a traumatic situation. And then you have other people who are saying, you know, different rhetoric because of the polarization. I definitely try to do the best I can to keep my views out and document. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I'm not a Trump supporter, and I can go out and photograph Trump people. I have Republican clients. And so I'd like to think that I'm professional enough where I can keep my views out and be able to do the job.
I believe in being transparent and being fair. I mean, it doesn't take much for someone to just look at me or know that I'm an immigrant and know how I feel about certain things. But I really believe in telling two sides of the story and in using my experience to add perspective, add context to the story. I mean, don't let that be an obstacle, but actually use it to your advantage. As long as your focus is on telling other people's story, I mean, their story, and being, you know, as fair as possible, being as balanced as possible. I mean, the divisions we see today in the country, I mean, I take it as a journalist as a huge challenge to try to cut through the noise and get to the story and tell that story and get, you know, people from across both aisles to actually read them and hopefully make a difference.
So I just wanted to close with one, give each of you just 1 minute each. Whenever you're covering a story that has been this long in its duration, ongoing, no real kind of end in immediate sight, you go through a lot of ups and downs in terms of how you feel about the subject, how hopeful you are, how pessimistic you are. And I'm wondering if each of you could sort of just describe for us briefly kind of where you are in the trajectory of this long-term assignment. How are you feeling?
Should I go?
Sure. Ariana.
So when I first started documenting the migrant caravan, it actually, I think when speaking to other people, it weighed heavy on me because I wasn't hopeful. But I kept going because I was hoping at some point it would change. And that was a while ago, and giving some space, right? I've been focused on other things too, everything from COVID to Black Lives Matter to the election, and reading a bit about, Biden and the new administration. And not that everything is going to change overnight, but I am hopeful. I am. And the reason I'm also hopeful is because even traveling throughout Mexico and meeting other organizations like UNHCR, who have put together a program where people are trying to make it to the US, but it's just not going to happen, not anytime soon. They have programs where they can help you find a job and then, start your new life, you have a home. I can go on, and I only know I have a minute, but I am hopeful now.
I just go to August 3rd of 2019 when a young man from North Texas came to El Paso and targeted people who look Mexicans. He killed 23 people. He was here to stop the invasion of Texas, the Hispanic invasion of Texas. And I thought at that moment, that day was my father's birthday, and I thought, how can this happen to a man who came to this country because he was so hopeful. And I went through a long period of time where I thought, when you even question whether the reason I got into journalism was to try to be that bridge between both countries and try to educate both countries. But in interviewing some of the victims of the massacre, the Walmart massacre, I was able to find my hope when it was these victims who were able to tell the stories. And I really believe that in journalism, stories really do heal. They heal the divide, they heal the wounds. And finding these people saying, I forgive this person, or they found hope this way or that way, gives me hope. I think in the darkest periods, I mean, when you're talking to people, that's where I feel the most hope in others.
I just want to thank you both really deeply for tonight, of course, but also for the work that you do. I've been thinking about something that Ariana said early on. You were showing a picture of the woman, actually of the man who was digging the hole under the fence, and a woman's children had scaled it, but she had been unable to. And you said, I don't know what became of her story. And I'm thinking that that must be true for both of you with so many people. And you have plenty of editors and you don't need another one, but I, for one, hope that there is a real journalistically a real reckoning, so we know what happened to those children who were separated from their families. There has to be kind of a thorough accounting of that at some point, but so many people whose stories we don't know the ending of, right? So this stretches out ahead of us for a long time. And I look forward, I know we all do, to continuing to read and to see your work. Thank you both. And thank you to Susie and to everybody who made this possible tonight, and to all of those who were in attendance. Ariana and Freddie, take good care.
Thank you so much.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good night.